For listeners, I am with Mark Edwards, and last time around we had Neil Cummings who had joined us. And this is the second part of a two-part series looking at essentially how we could outsmart the competition without outspending them. In other words, if I could put it another way, developing a sustainable competitive advantage. And last time around, we looked at what that entails and introduced the idea of the iceberg model, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, is basically trying to distill the information that we need to convey to the marketplace and perhaps when we need to convey some of that information, which then leads us into your framework, which you call competitive space. And if I'm not mistaken, in summarize that, it's essentially looking at how you could position and communicate in order to gain attention without being noisy or outspending the competition.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. That was a very, very good summary there, because I think our last session was 90 minutes. And when we finished with you, because I know that we ran out of time in the end, I said to Neil, we'll see if Vinny liked it or not, because you mentioned about part 2. I said, if he didn't like it, we'll never see that invitation for part 2. We'll just never hear from him again. so fortunately you're back. So there's a thumbs up from you, at least. Hopefully your audience will like it as well.
Sure,
but yes, that was actually was brilliant. That's what it's about. You know, I was saying to you just before we started part 2 of this podcast, the biggest difficulty I think that we have is not sounding like fantasists or people who are exaggerating. This is something that we've researched over 8 years. We've done intensive work together with Neil over the last couple of years, you know, using his cognitive science background. It's also a culmination of my 30 years in the software sector and Neil's decades in marketing and cognitive science. What this is about is about codifying success for software companies.
Yep.
I think, you know, the concepts and the techniques and what we're talking about as a system will work for other sectors, but that's not what we're about. It's about focusing in on the software sector, because I think it's a sector that needs this the most. Because they are
certainly.
There's massive success to be had by many, and at the moment it's being had by very few, and the rest struggle. And it's not because your software is not good enough. Forget that. Obviously there will be examples where the software it just isn't good enough, but that's found out very quickly. But I come across hundreds and hundreds of software developers that have great software that will solve a problem. It's not that's going to get you the success. That's the key thing.
Yeah. Mark will mention for the benefit of listeners that it would help to watch the video version of our chat, and I'll include that in the show notes on the website, sproutwith.com. So Mark, perhaps a good place to start would be to look at the competitive space framework. I don't know if you've got that slide. If so, that would be handy.
I haven't got that here. I mean, we can send that across to you. There's a number of different slides that I think that we could show you around the framework. Unfortunately, Neil's not been able to join us today, and he would normally have access to that. But let me talk about some of the concepts, and I think that it will perhaps help to resonate with people. One of the first things that we spoke about was about what we call strategic positioning. And that is understanding how you talk about your business. And that's not just for the external audience, that's also for an internal audience. And that is so important, yet very few actually get that right. If you get it right, it gives you the solid foundation on which you can move forward. So internally within your organization, people will understand who you are, what you're about. I mentioned about the Simon Sinek why.
Yep.
And you know, that created massive attention. And you know, what I was saying is my critique was, okay, so how are you going to do it? What he did, he communicated a point very, very effectively, and he did it visually, and people got it. And I heard loads, you know, all of my meetings after that, I was hearing people repeating back to me what I'd already seen from Simon Sinek. You see that a lot in the software industry, and it goes in sort of fashions and phases. But the the issue with that is, okay, that's true. You do need to understand the real why of your business. But how do you do that? And then how do you take that forward? How do you turn that into more sales? And that's what we're talking about. More sales. Sales is the engine of your business. Without sales, everything else fails. It's critical.
Yeah.
And before sales, you need to be able to communicate. You know, if you had, you wouldn't think of opening up a business and then hiding the business. But that's effectively what a lot of software companies do. They either hide it because they don't communicate, or they hide it because they communicate it in a way that people don't understand or just don't care. I mean, there is an issue before that, which is one of the concepts we talk about, and it's one of the phases we go through, and we take our clients through that stage, and we will be objective in that, is what we call hot sector. Have you created something on which there is not just a need, but it's a real want? It has to be something that's not just a nice to have. And unfortunately, I think a lot of software entrepreneurs that I speak to that are struggling are talking to me, and they can talk about the problem. And yes, they do have a solution to a problem, but it's either not articulated in a way that gets anybody excited or really understand it, or it's just really not a big enough problem to spend that amount of money on time on, or that amount of focus. And there's a lot of those solutions. And sometimes that happens because they create a solution and then go looking for the problem. And that's not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I find, and again, goes back to a point that we made last time, was, I don't mean this, I'm not here to beat up software entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm a great fan, but I think in order to get to the right answers, you do need to be very frank and honest. And a lot of the software industry, they are technologists that love technology. A lot of them are computer scientists, computer engineers, or they've been in the industry for quite some time. And what worked then doesn't work today. And it's very difficult to let those habits go. If you have approached your business and the way that you've won business in the past and it's been successful for you, to let go of that, what brought you success, and then adopt something new is very, very hard. And the difficulty is that there is so many myths out there that how do you cut through the nonsense that you hear? You know, I spoke about some of these phrases that are just repeated endlessly, and it becomes an illusionary truth, and you actually believe it. So what we did is just to actually take all of that away and to look at the problems, reverse engineer it, and then say, but why? Is that really true? And it has to be, we wanted to look for scientific evidence, and that's what we did. And if we couldn't, or if we felt it was fake science, which honestly a lot of it is, then we just discarded it. And there are some fundamental truths here that can't be denied. And one of them, which is right at the start, is in order to sell something, you have to get the attention of the market. And getting the attention of the market is not what it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, because of the digital marketing revolution, because of the omni-channel, and because of what's happening. And we have so many other distractions now. And because we've got a new generation that you may be, even in B2B, I mean, predominantly a lot of our work has been B2B software, but the principles apply the same. Is that there are lots of other attractions. So without that initial attention, and that's the sort of the first part of that, is you've got to position your business correctly so that it's going to matter to your audience. You do have to have a solution that, when you boil it all down truthfully, it solves a problem that matters. and that's sort of before you even start. Don't even start on your communication if you haven't got that right. You've got to go away and you've got to find something different if you haven't got that. So that's the hot sector. But then once you have something, and there are lots of software companies out there that do have really good solutions to problems that matter, but they struggle. They get some business, and all business, most business, I don't think I've ever had gone to a software company, unless it's a raw startup, where they say we've got no customers. Nobody's there. So there's always degrees of success, and that is part of the problem as well. Because if you're getting some success, then it validates you continuing what you've always been doing. We've just got to work harder and harder and harder. But you get to a limit. You've only got so many hours in the day. You've only got so much cash to spend on this. A really bad proposition communicated poorly in a way that doesn't have a lot of clarity, you will still get some success. And that's part of the problem here. But you don't want to do it that way. So you've got to be able to gain the attention so that what you have is actually seen. Otherwise, it will never be seen. But then you need to have understanding and clarity about what it is that you have, so that they should care, and they need to care in an emotional way. And that's partly what you saw with the iceberg. Is people buy emotionally. They do not buy logically, except for 5%, and that comes at the end to justify.
So if I understand this correctly, the starting point of the framework is strategic positioning, and that's based of all the work that you do in the iceberg or with the iceberg model.
Yes, that's one of the sort of the core concepts, is being able to pull out what's really important to our target audience. So in order to be able to do that, you need to first of all know who your target audience. And one of the key mistakes that I see made from software companies is that they try to sell to everybody. And in trying to sell to everybody, you end up with this very bland message that is exciting to nobody. And especially in the early stages, you need to be razor-like focused. And the change here is, in the early days of software was being sold pre-internet. And quite a lot of software developers, and there was a lot of bespoke developers in those days who were writing solutions for businesses for their specific needs. Part of their validation of why you should come to them was, we're only 5 miles from your doorstep. And that was quite important, because if I have a problem with my software, I need you guys on site and I need you to sort it. So that was quite important, and that was quite powerful. Nowadays, that doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter whether you're next door or on the other side of the world. So you've got to think about what is really important. And you've also got to realize is you've got thousands more competitors than you had before. Whereas previously, you may have had 2 other companies that you were competing with in your region, because 80% of your business, was within a 40-minute drive of where you were based.
Certainly. So if in looking at strategic positioning, what would be, I guess, some of the tangible assets we would be able to derive through this process?
Well, it's the foundation stone upon which you talk about. It's the lens through which you talk about your business to your audience and also to your internal staff. So once you get that focus, it's about focus, you're able to communicate much more quickly why somebody should be interested in you, and for it to be understandable to more of those people more quickly. So tangible benefit, shorter sales cycle, less competition.
So I'm trying to visualize what this would look like. Would this be like a one-page document where it's your strategic positioning is outlined? In what
our client works with, something like that. They would have a narrative, which is the sort of the longer version. What about this business is the story of their business. It could be the story explaining the vision that you will be placing into the minds of your clients. And that's very important. There'll be a summary positioning, which is very, very short, is so that people can look at your business and go, oh, I get it. I get what they do. And that's interesting. I want to know more. It doesn't, and this is where a lot of software companies make a mistake. It doesn't educate them on everything that I might ever need to know about that software product. It doesn't answer every possible question that they might ever want to ask you. And that's what a lot of software companies do. They think that their job is to answer every single question that might be thrown at them, and they put it all up on a website, and it becomes indigestible. So it's the right information delivered at the right time. And what I may want to know from you about your business once we've been talking for 3 weeks is different from what I want to know when I first speak to you. You do finally get to the more detailed information. And you as a company decide when you want to give a prospect that more detailed information. You don't necessarily want to push that out into the whole market. There could be, important aspects of your IP within that. But a lot of the software companies, it's partly habit. It's partly they just doing what they've always done. It's partly laziness, I think. It's partly just submitting to your client's requests in all its facets. So example that I had, one of the things that I did as part of our research, which we call the Bamboo Report, which was looking at the most successful companies, is I went in as a customer and experienced how they treated a prospect going through. What really surprised me was the degree to which they were able to control those stages that you need to go through in making the decision to buy. As opposed to, I'd had a call the previous week and I was looking at some software that we needed within the business. And I had an initial call and it was an introductory call. And then the salesman said to you, and I'll send you some information to answer your questions. And I said, great, okay. And I got 15 different documents attached to an email, quite a long email. And guess how many of those attachments I read? None. He's just gone, these are all the questions I've ever been asked, bash, send it over to me. And it's just too much. I haven't got time to read 15 documents. And nor has anyone else.
Certainly. So there's an element of personality, which I believe is the second part of the framework. You had referred earlier to the fact that people buy based on emotions, or the emotions that are evoked, and not so much on logic. So really looking at personality and the way you position your brand, but that's a pretty vital component, I would think.
It is, yes, that's right. And it may surprise people. I think some people instinctively know this, and this is the reaction that I've had from people, is I'll mention that and I get a half smile on their face, which is sort of acknowledging the fact that I've never heard it stated quite like that. And there are scientific studies, a number of scientific studies that back that up. I don't want to go into too much detail on that side, but the studies are there. So I think some people know that instinctively, but they don't behave accordingly. They still behave as though it's just logic.
You
see what I mean? And they will do all of those things, which is, if it's just logic. And they'll say to me, and these are the comments we get all the time. Yes, but you don't understand. Our customers are different. And I say, well, unless you're dealing with aliens, we're all humans, and this is based upon human behavior, and they're not different. They go, yeah, but they're technical. Yeah, but they're technical humans. And yes, there will be certain logical facts that they need to establish. Does our software integrate with yours? Has it got the API gateway? Yeah, sure, you're going to have to fit. Does it work on our stack? Does it integrate with our software? And some functional things. But before that, and that's the important thing, you need to establish that emotional link so they want to do business with you. And I've been on the other side of that. So I've been with an organization which was making a decision about making expenditure that was over, well over $1 million. It worked out to about 1.7 million in the end to buy an enterprise software solution. And I was sitting with them as a consultant, giving them a bit of input and advice. And I was watching the presentations that were happening to this group of people to make a decision about which solution they were going to buy. So they had a little bit of a preempt work with some of these companies just to make sure that they could see there was a fit. But during the calls, and this was a video call, you could see where they were buying into the people that were presenting. There was at the end of each call that we had, or each presentation, there was a sort of a let's gather our notes and let's talk about what we felt. And then they went through all the presentations and then they made a decision at the end of it. But I knew after I saw one of these presentations where it was going to go, and it wasn't based upon logical reasons. They just liked the people. They liked the way they presented it. They presented it in a way that was clear and understandable. And everyone was leaning in. You could hear in the tone of their voice, they liked those people. They liked what they said. They thought that they'd be nice people to do business with, and now they're looking for logical reasons as to why they're going to do business with them. And that's how decisions are made. And I'll argue that point with any of your listeners that's in the software sector and think it's just based upon logic. Give me their names and email addresses, because we've been through that a lot of times. And it's just something to say, okay, I mean, that is genuine. It is an emotional decision, 90 to 95% of it, and then the rest is logic.
Yep.
But then are you acting on the premise that it isn't emotional? Or are you just acting on the premise that it's logical and you're just going through this like a robot? Because you're not selling to a robot.
So my takeaway would be that you really don't need to put up an artificial facade, if you will, in that you don't need to try and be somebody you're not.
Absolutely.
And in the way you communicate. And it's quite all right to have what you might consider no fluff, matter of fact personality.
Yes.
It's straight to the heart of the matter. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters to some of your ideal customers.
Yeah, I think it's be who you are.
Yeah.
So there's individuals, but you also get a business personality.
Sure.
And that to a certain degree to a great degree will be led by the founder, the CEO.
Correct.
And the business tends to be created in the profile of those leaders. And they will tend to recruit people that they feel fit within that mold. But then the entity is together, it creates a personality. But be that, and don't be afraid to show that personality. That's important, because it may not be exactly like them, but they can see it. And we call it, it's part of what we call the telescope model, which is, I'll give you a simple example of this, is that within your network, if you've got some friends that you've known, say, for more than 10 years, you will have quite a variety of people that you know. And if you were going to a particular event, say you had to go and do a talk on stage, and you said, I need to bring somebody with me, and you had to think through your friends, you would pick somebody that, based upon your knowledge of them and your experience with them in the past, you would think they're probably the best person for me to do this thing that's coming up in the future. You see what I mean? It's based upon what I know about them, how I've had, experiences, maybe you've been in a similar situation with them before, what you know about their history. It helps you to predict what's going to happen in future. Now, if I come to a company and I can start to see, it leads on to another point, but I can start to see the personality of that organization, it's authentic. The other point that we need also to speak about is actually doing it, is not just saying you've got to do it. Show people, don't tell them, which is the first point. Then I gain greater confidence that I'm going to get the outcome that I want. It helps me in making that decision. If you just hide away like some software geek who doesn't like photographs being taken and hides away in a dark room just programming and nobody can see you, what am I buying into here with this company? What is it about? Now, it doesn't matter if you're a Star Trek fan and you are the sort that hides away and you're into geeky things. That's fine, but just be that and let people see it. And people are very different. You know, it's creating a personality for your business that people get. So when they contact you, oh yeah, and it helps them to also to remember you. Don't become the grey man in the industry, which a lot of software companies do. They sort of want to create this blandness, which they see as being very professional. It's not, it's just boring and forgettable.
Yeah. Yep.
So the other point that's very much related to that is about telling people things. So everyone that when they're writing summaries and talking about their business, they tend to write things like highly professional, you know, caring for our customers. That's a waste of words. Don't even bother using it, because it will, things like that will only be of benefit to you is if your competitors are saying we're total amateurs and we don't give a damn about you. Do you know what I mean? If you're going to create competitive space, you're going to be saying exactly the same as them.
Yep.
The better way to do it is don't tell them, show them. Show them that you're professional. Show them that you care. And you do that by how you respond to them when they come to you, when they make an inquiry, by what you send to them, by how you listen to them. And that shows that you care. And then by how you help them.
I'm assuming that there would be some sort of documentation to guide an organization through the practice of conveying this personality across.
Yes.
Does that take the shape of a tone of voice document or something of that nature?
Yes, I mean we don't talk about brand, we don't talk about tone of voice because we're not a marketing agency. That's the important thing. Sure. And you know, this is me being frank and open, is the work that I've seen with software companies from digital marketing agencies is shocking, most of it. More money has been burnt in that area than I think any other. You have to have really great communication, but marketing advertising agencies, and there's always going to be some good examples out there, but if you really want to burn some money very, very quickly, that's the place to go and burn it, you know. And I've had clients say to me, I'd have been better off taking that money and burning it in the garden, because at least that way it would have kept me warm. That's how much good it did them. And there's a whole, I don't need to go into it, there's a whole host of reasons why they don't get it right. And I don't think that they're deliberately doing it. They just, like everyone else, they've struggled because the world's changed. And also because they don't understand the software sector. I think that causes quite a big barrier. It's not as straightforward as some other areas. And if your client is a retail store one day, you know, you're dealing with a physician, you know, a lawyer, a doctor, and then a software company, that's an awful hard to be able to get really good at all of those. It's like saying, you know, I want to be a professional cricketer, rugby player, and play for England football. You know, it's not going to happen, is it? You can't be great at all of those areas.
Yeah. So what would a potential client walk away with in terms of understanding their personality and putting it in a form that they could communicate internally?
Yes, so they will have, first of all, they have an understanding of competitive space and how it all fits together, because we have online training. We give training to them one-to-one. We do brainstorming. We pull out the essence of who that business is. We articulate that with a narrative. We give them a positioning statement. We give them a tagline, and we give them key themes that become the foundation stones in their communication moving forward. But then more than that, we get them to understand one of our other principles, which is stepping stones across the river.
Yep.
So that is, I'm on this side of the river, and one of the issues that, you know, when I said about we reversed engineered things, one of the issues that we saw with a lot of software companies is they get some sales, and what that does is it conditions them to continually repeat the behavior from behavior that's not very efficient. So if you think of yourself on the riverbank looking across. You've got a raging river in between, and you've got to get to the other riverbank. Effectively, that's what you've got to do with a client. Is they're on the opposite riverbank to you, and you've got to get them across the river. And what some of them do is they set up a few stepping stones, and then they leave this giant leap. Some don't even give them the stepping stones. They just expect some people to leap across the river. A few people do that. The vast majority don't. So there was a book written many, many years ago, Crossing the Chasm. And it was one of those books that 20 odd years ago, everyone was talking about, and everyone was talking about the concepts in it, and it became overhyped. But there were some essential truths within that, which is that you get those people that are willing to take that leap with early technology. They are the risk takers, and they will also take a risk with a business. They'll say, I like it. I like what I understand, and I'm going to take that leap. But most people don't. And there are decision stages that you need to go through, whatever you're buying. And those stepping stones help them to get across the river. So what we do is we help our clients design those stepping stones that enables somebody to make a small step to move a little bit further to making that act, to buying. So from where they are, I've never heard of you, to that's interesting. I get it. I see how that could help me. Each one's a stepping stone. This could really pay dividends for us. Okay, how would we make that acquisition? What would we need to do? Great, I'm ready to sign. It's all of those stages, and it's communication to help make that journey less frictionless. Is to make it frictionless, to make it easier for them. I'll give you just a simple example. Software demonstration. A lot of software companies are very focused upon getting somebody to do a software demonstration. Now, we've got a whole section just about how you do that demonstration from a psychological point of view, because again, most companies do it very poorly. But if you've got a software demonstration booked, what information do you send to the prospect once it's booked until the time that it's booked, to keep them interested and to make that demonstration go more smoothly and be more understandable for them? Most software companies don't do anything, but it's a great opportunity. You've got commitment from your prospect. He said, yeah, I'm willing to spend some of my time to have a look at your demonstration. But the problem with most demonstrations is the person comes away baffled or not really getting it or not sure. Well, one way of helping set up that demonstration is by having communication on the way to that point. So it's what are those stepping stones for your company, and it's different for every business. And what do you need to be saying, which is the minimum amount of information to get them to the next step, because every little step that they make is a further commitment to you and your company. It's a further step towards you and a step away from your competition. And that's one way to think about it. They're moving forward, moving across that river.
So personality would come out through the narrative, the key themes and the stepping stones. Is that what I'm hearing?
You have to. Yes, you have to bring that out. So it's articulating what your strategic position, and when we're saying about strategic position, it's not just about being understandable. It's positioning yourself in such a way that people see why you're the obvious choice in your market and not your competitors. That's very hard. That is very hard to do. So that's why they have to pay us a lot of money for that. But the whole thing, it's because it is valuable. It's more valuable than the money you're spending on developing your software. In many instances, I think that there's a very good argument to be doing the communication into your market before you've got your software, because at least that way you can test to see whether there is an appetite for it. A lot of companies, they just work on their software, spending hundreds and millions on their software, get to launch it and go, oh, no one's interested.
Certainly. Okay. So talk to us about the third and fourth steps, which I believe are attention and compelling. How would you ensure that you incorporate those facets?
Well, attention comes earlier in the process. Attention in your communication is the first step to get somebody looking your way, because then you've got the opportunity to have a dialogue with them, to communicate with them. Attention is gained in a number of different ways, and I think one of the aspects that we mentioned previously was that this is not just about words, and in fact a lot of it is visual, and that's very important, but it's understanding how visuals work and how visuals work upon the brain. So you can do that with visuals, and you use a combination of words, but there are other senses as well that you can use in order to gain people's attention. We could write a book on just that subject alone, writing it, you know, gaining attention. But it's using the way that the brain is structured in order to make your messages jump out above the rest. And then compelling is a number of different things. And with a lot of these subjects that we're covering, they're sort of multi-layered. But compelling is communicating in a way that makes the client want to engage with you, and that engagement happens over a period of time. So once you've gained attention, and especially if we're talking about a software solution that costs a lot of money, you know, if it's a £10 widget type of software, it's the same process, but it's much more condensed. But if you're talking about hundreds of thousands, then people don't typically go onto a website and go, that's great, okay, 300,000, no problem, here's my credit card. That's not going to happen. So the compelling part is that you're gaining more and more engagement over the period of your communication. And that can vary from a few weeks, a few days, to months, to sometimes years. And that happens a lot. You know, big software enterprise sale, it's gone on for years, and that's the very nature, because there's a lot of people involved in that. But making it compelling is a combination of different things. It's knowing your audience, knowing what really matters to them, and using language that they understand and draws them in.
If I can put this another way, you're saying that you're building trust with them over time to the point where they go, right, this seems like a good logical step to take, and follow through on action that you might prescribe.
Trust is one element. Yes, true. I suppose that ultimately trust is probably the end result of a lot of these things. I think that the understanding through the eyes of your customer enables you to communicate in a way that makes them say, that's it, that's exactly what I want, even when they haven't probably fully understood themselves sometimes. It's enabling your customer to be a better version of themselves. So you're giving them a product or a service that enables them to be a better version of themselves, and for them to suddenly see that.
Okay. What's a good example of a company that you feel does this particularly well?
Companies that everybody's heard of, Tesla.
Okay.
And they do that in a number of different ways. But first of all, they broke the mold with who they were as an organization, both in their leader, but also in your experience of when you have contact with them. So when you go to see them, if you think of, buying a car, what are the negative connotations that you think about when buying a car? Car salesman? Well, they didn't employ car salesmen. They hired people from the computer industry that went about it in a completely different way.
Yep.
And what they also did was that at that time, there were already companies out there that were selling the greener car, Toyota with the Prius.
Right.
That wasn't what they focused upon. What they focused upon was a really practical car that goes really fast. And that appeals to a lot of people. They weren't just solely focusing upon this green So they were attracting people. Yeah, I mean, there's a debate as to whether electric car at the moment is greener. I think it will happen eventually, but the batteries are an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But they've now got a car which is it can do 500,000 miles, and that's what we're starting to see, because those cars have been around for some time, and they're aiming to get the 1,000,000-mile car. That's they're saying that the current designs are aimed to get to a car to 1,000,000 miles, and it's going to cost you a lot less money, and it's going to go very, very fast in comfort with a lot of tech. And they're appealing to all the techie people out there, because when you get in the car, he didn't create a better dashboard like you traditionally see in a car. He gave you a computer. So he made it compelling and engaging for all of those people because it was so different. He didn't, like the Henry Ford thing, I didn't create a faster horse. He created something different. Yeah. And that's what he did. He didn't follow Prius, Toyota, which just had essentially it looked like a normal car, really. I mean, I know you couldn't hear it. When you get in a Tesla, it's very different. I mean, if you look at the Tesla X, again, it was something very, very different with the gull wings that go up. Yeah, very, very different. And he appealed to all of the people that like all of that. But they didn't do that through spending a lot on traditional marketing. Yeah. They did it by the stories that they told and by what was being said about Tesla. There was a lot of PR. And Elon Musk was very, very successful at that. He stood out. I think you mentioned Jim last time talking about him. He stood out. There's a personality, isn't there?
Certainly. Yeah.
If you had him on this podcast, you would sort of know what to expect. It would be something a bit outlandish. He's going to say something, he's going to do something, and there were examples. And he's made many mistakes, but people sort of forgive him because they say, well, it's Elon Musk, but I'll still buy his car. Now, he took a no-name, a company that had never produced cars before, and within a few years, it was valued more than Porsche. With all of the tradition, with all of the engineering, and there's a lot of logical arguments as to why you want to buy a Porsche, but he did that, and he created a strategic positioning, and he's dominated Porsche, and he did it in a few years. So. Yeah, that's one example. There are others, and again, because businesses are unique as a fingerprint, there are different ways of doing it, and there could be several ways of doing it. You can apply these concepts and come up with a different right solution. That's the really important thing.
I believe the fifth part of the framework is understood, and by that I'm assuming that the message that you deliver needs to be understood by your future clients.
Yes, it sounds obvious, but it sounds like common sense, put it that way, that no one's going to argue with. But I find that it's not common. And my experience of that is I've been in the software sector a long, long time, and I have to go and look at new businesses. There are new businesses coming along, and I have to go back and look at older businesses, and they change their proposition. And the number of times that myself, not just myself, we have researchers that are gathering information all the time. And you go and look at what they're presenting to the outside world, and you go, what is that? What do they mean by that? What's that? And they're using all of these strange acronyms without any explanation. And yes, there is a small section of the market that probably understands what that acronym is. I came across one the other day. It was DOOOH, and then they had OOOH. Do you know what it means?
No idea.
I didn't either, and I've been in the software sector for years, and I think there'll be very few people. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what it means. People can go away and research it, and they didn't have any explanation as to what that actually meant. So immediately you've got this audience out there that they might find that they need what you've got, but it's now been shrunk down to a very minority of the people. So it's understandable. It works in a number of different ways. It's talking to them why use technical jargon? Why use acronyms when you can just talk in conversational English and write in conversational English? And that is an art. And I think actually for a lot of individuals, they're just not good at that. And then you need professional help to be able to do it.
Would you say it's part science as well, in that brands need to be chasing after not just quantitative data, but also qualitative research in terms of seeking out how customers perceive their brand and their product in order to then transfer it into copy?
As regards being understandable, I mean, I think some feedback can be useful. Yeah. I think it can also be quite difficult if you're steered solely by your customer. Feedback's useful, but you also have to innovate and you have to think ahead, because your customer, it's not your customer's job to be thinking 24 hours a day about what your solution should do. They can give you feedback as to what, if they're using the software and they're saying, I don't like the interface, or I find this difficult to understand, that's good. But I think beyond that, if you do see companies and they're just solely using what they're getting back from the marketplace as their guide as to how they communicate, that's why you need concepts and principles that you can follow and that are proven and based upon science. I'll give you an example, and this is based upon my experience, because I worked for a number of years as a partnership manager, working with partners who were selling our software, and they would be very vocal and give you feedback about the software that you developed. And most of the time, or a lot of the time, the feedback that you got from those partners to what you should be doing as a software developer was based upon their ineffectiveness in being able to sell it. They would not be necessarily the greatest sales organizations, or they should be stronger really for what they are, because that was their role. That happened a lot, a few decades ago. There were that sort of relationship between the software developer, who was a very technical, and then your partners, perhaps they were distributors. Their job was to be the sales and market partners in different regions and different sectors, horizontal and vertical. That's probably broken down to a certain extent, because much more now happens directly. But their key ability must be their ability to be able to sell, to be able to market and sell into that sector. And quite often that they would be given, that sector or that region to be able to do that. Where they failed, they would often go back and blame the software developer and say, you need to be doing this for us. And it tended to be around, we need more information. We're not selling because we haven't given them enough information. And that tends to be sort of a stock answer. And if you go down that route, you end up with, like the salesman did for me, here's the email and here's 15 documents for you to read.
Certainly. Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. So ultimately, we do need a degree of feedback in order to make sure that whatever we craft is understood.
Listen to your market. Yeah, listen to your market, talk to your market, get to be able to see through their eyes. But you can't take everything that's fed back to you, especially when you take it in isolation. I've heard a few companies who have gone from being very passive to being proactive in their marketing. So they start sending out emails and making calls and reaching out into the market. And then they get 3 people who say to them, don't ever contact me again. And they go, look, we mustn't do this. And you have to say, hang on a minute, you've contacted 3,000 people and 3 people have said they don't like it. Doesn't mean you should stop doing it. Just don't contact them again.
Yeah.
So it's taking that feedback, but being able to do it in a balanced way. Because they say, I don't like your company name. Doesn't mean you're going to go out and change your company name all of a sudden.
Yeah. Okay. The 6th component is credibility. And
yes.
Most companies tend to use things like white papers, case studies, or logos from other brands to provide the degree of credibility. Is there another way of looking at this?
Yes. Be credible. It's
How do you
so, I think Neil said last time, we call that borrowed credibility, and people do that in various ways. Now, different personality types, and remember, you're going to be selling most likely to quite a wide range of personality types. They're going to focus upon different things to a different degree. For me, when I look at a product or a service and they tell me this is great because I've sold it to X, has no effect on me whatsoever. In fact, the only effect it might have, and it has in the past, I was talking to a software company about a solution which was to do with the work that we do in M&A, and they said, we sell to all of these other M&A companies. And I thought, on that basis, I'm just not interested. You're telling me you've got a close relationship with one of our closest competitors. I don't want to work with you. But the fact that they've chosen to do it is different. I think, well, that's their business. I want to make up my own mind about it. Now, other people will gain a certain degree of comfort or security to say, we're in the petroleum business and there's other companies. This is becoming an industry standard. And I can understand that. So there is a degree of credibility, and case studies, and then the logos. But how much is that going to really help you? Are your competitors saying, we haven't sold it yet, we haven't got any case studies, so we can't put any logos up, but we'll give it a good go and we might get the right result? They're all going to have case studies. I mean, even startups, they find a way to get a case study, don't they? And they put up some logos. So I'm not saying don't do the white papers, don't do the logos, don't do the case studies, but I'm saying gain your own credibility in the way that you behave when you've got the opportunity to come in contact. And that contact happens from the first time they look at your website. Excuse me. I had a client, or a number of clients in the past, that I've said to them, look at your website or look at your email or look at this leaflet that you're sending out and really look at it. What sort of impression does it give? And even down to the things like the photographs of, as a photographer, I tend to look at that. The photographs that they've taken of their senior management. If they've been taken by themselves on an iPhone, or it's them on the beach with the kids in the background, and it's just something that's just not appropriate, and you sometimes see that. I'm not saying that you don't show the other side to you, that, you have a private life as well. That can work, but the quality of the photographs, so people look at it and think, oh my God, blurry, out of focus, just badly composed. That's not the reason that they're not going to do business with you, but it's one small thing. For Peter Drucker, I think I said it last time, Peter Drucker, coffee stains on the seat when I get on the aircraft, I'm starting to worry about the maintenance on the engine. If it's sloppy inside, what did they do in the maintenance of the engine? I've got a little worry in my head. If your photograph looks like it's something you've just done a selfie, and it's looking up your nose, how they're saying they're professional, but are they really? And then you contact them and it takes them 3 days to respond, and then when you get an email back, it doesn't help you in any way, and it's poorly written. All of those things, that's credibility. Or when you have the first conversation with them, they just talk at you and they never listen. That's something else that you see quite a lot. A good salesman, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. And all of that conveys genuine credibility that is your own. You own it. It's not dependent on other people.
Okay. And that, I guess, leads into the next component, which is being memorable, and ties into this whole conversation around using visuals to stay top of mind and be a bit sticky.
Partly. Yes. Yeah. Most people are very visual with their memory. And the example that we often use is, think of a story that you were told as a child. You could probably still retell that story. You can tell it to your children, but you may not have heard it for several decades. Now tell me the last sales deck presentation, PowerPoint presentation that you saw, which may have been yesterday, how much can you remember of it? Usually very little, because it tends to be, it's not cohesive. So your story is cohesive, and the stories that we was told as children were very visual. You know, picture book, we were shown pictures.
Yeah.
As adults, we create, when we read a book, we create those pictures in our head. And that's why quite often, if you read the book and then they create a film, a lot of people say it wasn't as good as the book.
Yeah.
It's because, well, it never will be, will it? Because you've created the film exactly as you want it.
Yeah.
And you've got that visual image. And then the film, the hero doesn't look quite like the hero you had in your head.
Yeah.
So the degree to which you can create a visual picture in your head, or more importantly, the more that you can help your client to have that visual picture in their head of what that vision is for the future for them, once they have your solution, the more difficult it is, or the more memorable it will be, and the more difficult it will be for your competitor to dislodge it. How you do that is, again, is multi-layered. So it's creating that, we call it painting the vista. So the framework, if you like, that we have there is one of a frame, funnily enough. So you create a frame. The frame is the limits of the subject that you're going to be talking about, the limits of the problem, the solution. You know, we can sell you software. We don't sell overcoats. You know, it's, so what we're talking about is within this frame. But you could also create for them what we call a canvas. So you must allow your client to draw and sketch out the problem, and then maybe the outcome that they want. You then can layer on the paint onto that to create a very vivid picture, the vista, the vision of what they're aiming for, on what they get with you. So it may be that they've created a sort of a semi-clear image of what they want. Your job is to help them make that clearer, sharper, more colorful, and more, perhaps. Quite often it can be more, because you've got that problem. We can solve that, but by doing it this way, this will also enable all of these people within your organization to also have this and this. Is that attractive? You know, it's creating that wow, that's far more than I thought I was going to get, but that's really valuable. That is valuable to me. So he's creating that picture so that they can walk away with that and be able to talk about it. And maybe it is actually something that you can create with your client and show to them physically so that they can walk away and show their colleagues. And what will happen there, and this is just one aspect of this, is by them working with you to create that vista, the vision of what they could have in future, they own it, and then they can sell it to other people within their organization.
So in fact, as part of the whole positioning process, you're collaborating with potential clients to create a very personalized narrative that in which they're almost the hero in that narrative.
Can be, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And by virtue of that, creating a narrative that prepares them to become advocates for your brand.
Yes, because here I'm talking about the more complex, sort of the larger enterprise type solutions. Again, if it's the £10 widget application, it's slightly different. But the principles, see, this is the beauty of this. By having the right concepts and principles, it becomes universal. But it's the degree to which you use the different tools here within competitive space. So thinking about the larger enterprise, you know, the longer sale, the bigger sale, the more expensive sale, is that you're working with them to help facilitate their thinking about the problems that they have, but more importantly, the outcomes that they want. And then you're painting that picture in a way that is understandable to them. You're not creating what we call, you know, the word diagrams, where they say, I'll show you all about our software. And then they have all these boxes with words inside, and people sit there and nod, and no one understands. It doesn't create anything in your head. It has to be, you have to work with your client, and you have to make it, there's a visual skill, there's a series of skills that you need in order to be able to use visuals effectively. And 99% of software companies haven't got a clue of how to do it. That's the really interesting bit. The opportunity is that this can be taught, and it's a science. Most software companies create visuals that are appalling at probably best. They're so bad, they actually create confusion. And the worst thing is that they don't know they're doing it. They create these things that they understand, and they go to their colleagues, and their colleagues go, "Oh yeah, it's good, yeah." And then they throw these things out to their clients, and most of the time the clients don't say to them, "That's just rubbish. I've got a clue what that means." People don't like saying, "I don't understand what you're talking about." When they come back with technical jargon, on the whole, I do all the time. I say, I don't know what that means. In fact, the funniest one that Neil and I heard, which was just last week, somebody we were talking to, and he said they came to me and presented to me, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. And I said to the person, I said, "Do you know what? 70% of what you said to me has gone completely over my head. And do you know what? I've got the inclination to learn." And that I think is what a lot of people are saying secretly in their own head, is when you get these presentations that are coming at you with lots of words and diagrams, word diagrams that don't communicate. A visual has to communicate very, very quickly. If you start putting lots of words in it, or if you're creating PowerPoints where it's probably got more than 6 words on it, row after row after row of bullet points with words, that's probably not communicating very well. And people won't say, "Stop, I'm not understanding this." They'll just sit there, they'll listen to it, and they'll probably never want to see another one of your PowerPoint presentations again. That's the problem.
So, okay. The next 2 elements of the framework are consistency and implementation. On the face of it, they sound fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. Is there more to it than
of course there is. You should know by now. I mean, how many sections have we been through? It's going to be much more to it. There is actually. So consistency. So what do we mean by consistency? Well, I think you have to be, we spoke about being authentic, and to a degree, consistency is being consistent to that authentic personality. Consistent also in the fact that we communicate through many different channels. And one of the mistakes that I see is looking at a business through the different channels. You sometimes think you're looking at a different business. Lack of consistency when you have a marketing function, a communication function that believes that they need to be coming up with something new all of the time. So even if they had the real core essence of what that business is about, in 3 months' time, they feel that they've done that, and now they're talking about other things to do with the business. And then 6 months from now, they're really talking about some very minor things that really aren't at the core of what this business is, because they think they've got to be talking about something new all the time. And that's a weakness, and you don't want to be doing that. There are certain themes, messages about your business that are the strongest aspects of who you are and what you are. You need to keep consistent to those, and you need to make sure that you are consistent in all of the stages that you're dealing with a client. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all you ever talk about. Is in that, because a prospect may have a couple of questions. If I had an email sent to me that was talking about some software, and I think that's really interesting, I'd like to know more about that. I went on to the website.
Sorry, Mark,
I can't see
you're
any
breaking up a fair bit. Is your internet connection okay?
I just saw a message come up. Yeah, I can hear you. How's that? Is it still breaking up?
It is. It's showing as red and yellow on my end. Now it's cleared up.
Is it?
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep, for now. Sorry,
Yeah,
if you could just backtrack a bit, because it broke
yes.
up a fair
So
bit.
what I was talking about was the consistency. The consistency comes in being consistent to who you are and the key aspects of your business, but also being consistent throughout that customer experience. And the examples that I've seen, and happens frequently, is marketing goes out and attracts people to the business through certain messages and visuals and in a certain look, and it's talking about, and it's attracted somebody. And then I speak to a salesman and he talks about something completely different and never mentions it. You've got to be consistent to understand what is right at the core, what makes you special, and you've got to be able to articulate. You can articulate it in different ways, and we're not talking about people becoming robotic. So everyone within the organization has memorized word for word, parrot fashion, this sort of narrative. But you've got to understand, you've got to be consistent to that. Otherwise, you start to confuse. And if you throw in too much at them, they will get confused over that. So that consistency you see in different respects, consistent to who you are, what you do and why it's important, but also consistent throughout the experience, so that somebody who's been attracted to you, they're going to get more information about that. And you're not getting somebody who pitches it in a completely different way that they think. I've seen that. I've had many times we've seen with our clients that we're working with, where they're saying, I didn't realize that. Oh, is that what we really do? It is, isn't it? Yes, I've never looked at it that way, but that's it. And if you've got too much inconsistency, it creates confusion, and confusion creates doubt, and doubt means that they don't want to part with their money.
Okay. Yeah.
Implementation is I don't like to be thought of as a consultant. We're always dodging around that to say we're not consultants, and only because I think a lot of people, and I have been bitten by the idea of consultants, that they come in and they ask you a lot of questions and then they feed back to you what you've just told them. They take your watch and then tell you the time. That's definitely not us. And I'm not saying all consultants are bad, but there is that association. The key aspect of this is we can create a fantastic positioning for you. We can really boil it down and enable you to be more of who you really are, and to be able to articulate that and communicate it and make you more memorable and consistent and all of those things. But again, if this isn't implemented correctly, all of that's wasted. And we don't want that, because we're not a factory that is going to be working with hundreds of thousands of companies, because that's just not possible. This is hard work. So anyone we engage with, from a purely selfish perspective, we want to see this implemented, and we want to see it make this company fly, because we're then going to point at that company. And when people say, why work with you? I say, well, this is who we are, but go and speak to them. They'll tell you why. And if it was just about, and I've seen this, us creating a report and telling them all the right things, very, very powerful things, and how to do it, but it's not implemented, then we may as well not done it. And so we also do is help them to understand that and help them to be able to implement it with something that's called a cognitive pathway. Now, cognitive pathway, I could spend the next week discussing it with you, but in very simple terms, again, it's something very different. Nobody else is doing it, but it's like a central core hub for all of your marketing that makes it all cohesive. And it means that you don't have to become a social media slave, generating hundreds of different bits of marketing that you're sending out into the marketplace that is just transitory. It just is here for a few minutes and then it's gone and it just disappears into the ether. This is a different way of going about it, and a way of marketing, making what you say more attractive to more people. as well, because we deal with all different personality types and people with different skills. So it's a way of overcoming that. But essentially it's called a cognitive pathway, and it reinforces your narrative and story about your business.
Okay. Just going back to consistency, if I understand this correctly, it's not about the volume of content, but figuring out the key themes that your brand is associated with and expanding on that, as well as associating yourself with people or other brands who resonate with some of those themes.
I mean, the last thing you said, that wasn't something that I said, but it could be. It could be that associating yourself with other brands. I know that there is a movement called B Corp, which I came across recently, which are organizations that behave in a very ethical way within business. And that's something that I've seen growing in strength over 10 years. Not that organization as such, but this idea that I think in the past, and I still come across it, there have been, not many, I must admit, especially in the software sector. I've met a lot of very good people that have become friends. I've come across people sometimes that have said, I know it probably wasn't the right thing to do, but this is business. And that term, this is business, is a sort of get out of jail card free morally for them to be able to do things that just aren't right. The way that they behave with people, the moral, doing business in the right way, doing it in an ethical way, I think is very important nowadays. And I think that's a fantastic movement. I'd wholeheartedly be behind that. So B Corp is about organizations that have sort of come together and they've said, we believe in this. We don't just say it, we genuinely believe in it. Because I think there's also been an aspect of that, of companies saying, we need to be more successful. Let's say we're green, and we'll put a page up and we'll tell people how green we are, but they don't really do anything about it. Or we'll put up this charity page, get Tom to go and run a marathon, and then we'll put up about him and we'll forget about it. That sort of thing. It's companies that really do, on an ongoing basis, do good things. So being associated in that way is correct. But the part about consistency is, don't overload your client with too much information. And if you're only, I could tell you 100 things. I mean, this podcast, I've probably told you 100 things, but you're probably only going to remember 5. But hopefully people can go back and they can have a look at it again. But if you tell somebody 100 things, they're only going to remember 5. Which 5? Whereas if you tell them 5 things and you tell them in different ways and you make it very understandable, they're probably going to understand those 5 things. So make it the most important 5 things. Think of it that way. And then the other aspect to that is, if those things are the most important aspects, especially at the beginning of the conversation, I'm not talking about customers who have been with you or people that are just at that final stage. I'm talking about the journey that they have with you. And most companies suffer from not getting enough people to talk to, not getting enough leads. So a lot of what we're talking about is the bit that happens before you can call them a qualified lead. Okay.
Right.
And at that stage, you don't need to be talking to them about the detail. We showed last time, the iceberg with the water line. The detail stays underneath the water. But most companies, they start with the other way around. They lead with the detail, and because that's where they're talking a lot of the time. So the consistency is just keeping to those core messages at the top.
Certainly. Okay. This has been terrific. If I remember correctly, the competitive space framework was arranged in the form of a circle.
Yes, the competitive space wheel. Yes, they're sort of the key elements of that. Yes, you're right.
So that would indicate each of these elements sort of feeds into the other. It's not something that is sort of done once and done forever kind of thing. It's something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis.
Yes, I mean, what we're about, and this goes back to the sort of the digital agency approach, is not us. Digital agencies, they want to work with a company over a long period, being paid on a monthly basis forever. We want to go in, we want to train and educate our client to understand competitive space. We create it for them, but then we train them on how to use it, and then we back out. And we leave them self-sufficient, and that's important for us. We want them to be self-sufficient. We they can call us back in and they can say, we're making a change, we're launching a new product, or we need a bit of creativity. I think what we're good at, and part of that is because we come from a creative background. I spent 4 years at art school. Strange, I'm in M&A, but that's useful. And the same with Neil. Neil's been a graphic artist, so we can come in and apply a degree of creativity, I think. But also part of the reason why we can do that is we don't work in the business. When you're working in the business, you're too close to it. To get that spark of creativity is difficult. So we can apply that creativity, but essentially we're giving them tools to say, here are the tools, here's the methodology, here's how you apply it. We create it for you. You can run with it. And, I would be enormously pleased if they came back and said, and we've applied it into this new division, or we created a new product and we applied competitive space and it's been fantastically successful. We did it all on ourselves. Brilliant. Go for it. That's exactly what I want to hear. But if you need to bring us back in, fine. But I'm not wanting them to be dependent on us. Get them up and running, get them the tools and go for it, run for it. And then when you become billionaires, just say, these guys, just point to us. That's all I want. Just a few things. I mean,
Mark, this has been terrific, and I know we've covered a lot of information, and
yes,
some of our listeners are just going to have to listen to this again in order to download or to take notes on everything. But is there an aspect that we haven't quite touched upon that you feel is important?
No, I think you've asked some good questions today, and I've come away from this thinking, wow, I think Vinny actually gets this competitive space, because somebody once said to me, and I would apply this to you actually. I think you've done very well. They said, we're going to engage with you because of the quality of the questions that you asked. And I would apply that to you and this podcast today. We did throw far more information at you than we would normally want to do in a presentation, but maybe people can put this on a continuous loop and watch it. but I think the quality of the questions actually showed that you did your homework and you were listening intently, which is impressive. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you and your audience. It's been a good experience. No, and Neil missed out on this second part. And I'm just going to tease him now about it. I'll say, Neil, it was fantastic.
A question I like to ask before we close, Mark, is if you were listening to these 2 episodes, what would be your top takeaway?
Good question. Everything's changed. Your communication and your marketing no longer has to be dependent, just throwing money at it. You now can outsmart, not outspend your competition, because this is based on science, and it works. Outsmart, not outspend it ultimately is the thing that we want our clients to achieve, and a greater level of success as well. And that really can be achieved. It's not been easy, I must admit, to get to where we are today. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without Neil and Neil's experience and my experience in the software sector. And I'd like to say that it was all done by design, but it wasn't. There was a lot of fluke here of just things happened to come together at the right time. But now we've got it. Remember competitive space, because you will be hearing about it in the future.
Excellent. Mark, if listeners are curious and wanted to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Best place, go to our website. We've actually been, since we launched the business last year, we've been so busy working with clients, we haven't actually fully completed our own website, but we're working on that at the moment. But go to outsmartstrategy.com. Go and have a look at that, and there's response forms that you can do, or you can find us on LinkedIn. So you can look for myself, Mark Edwards, or Neil Cumming.
Excellent. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.